Okay, it is 12:15, so we are going to get started. And I just want to thank everyone once again for joining us today. It's great to have you. We're pleased to be able to present this webinar series once again this year. Last year was the first time we had done this, and it was a great success. We had a lot of positive feedback from everyone, so thank you very much. And I believe we have posted some of the suggested topics for 2020. So we will review those again just at the end of the webinar. But if you have any suggestions, definitely feel free to reach out. So today we're going to be talking about understanding and selecting the most appropriate belt. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, there's a variety to choose from, multiple colors, white, yellow, green, black, and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing if you're not too familiar with it. So Jeff is going to walk us through. He's got a great presentation ready for you. For those of you that aren't as familiar with us, we do have some of our handles here. You can see if you want to connect with us through social media. But as an organization, we have been around since 2000. We're very passionate about continuous improvement and especially on how this can help you not only in your professional lives, but also in your personal lives. Because becoming more efficient just in anything you do, whether it's preparing reports or doing your day-to-day activities at work, or if it's just cooking a dinner meal more efficiently, it's going to free up more time for you. And that's something that you're going to hear us talking about quite a bit this year. And just getting to the point where you're thinking in that continuous improvement mindset. So as I mentioned today, Jeff Woods is our facilitator. He has years of experience in pretty much every industry under the sun. So don't be concerned if you have any questions that is particular to your industry. Jeff can definitely help you out with that. He's our primary facilitator for all of our public training programs. He's done a lot of on-site work with clients and has experience working with people at every belt level, both training and consulting. So without further ado, Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. And again, welcome everybody to a new year, a new decade as we move forward. And again, the theme, interesting theme, which is around, how can we be more effective in what we do so that we can decide what we want to do with that time that we're saving. And it can be, all of this applies either to work and to our personal life and personal process. So as we look at this, people often will talk about, well, what belt should we, what are we supposed to train people on? And I like to sort of step back and think about, well, why train anyone? What are we trying to accomplish? So when we look organizationally at things, we want to think, well, what are we trying to accomplish organizationally? What do we want to do? How are we structured? And that information can start to let us know, well, what do we need, or what answers do we need? What sort of understanding do our staff need to be able to do the things that we want them to do? Another thing that comes up often is around Lean versus Six Sigma, or combination of Lean Six Sigma training, or different combinations at different levels of belts. So do we have some people that only get Lean training, others that get Lean Six Sigma training? And really, they share a lot of the same attributes. Lean is really looking at how do I speed up the process by looking at non-value added activity. So how do I speed up and focus the activity? Six Sigma comes a bit more statistically, where it's looking at what's the variation within the process and how do I reduce that variation to be within the constraints of what the voice of the customer is, and therefore how do I, how can I be successful in that journey? And again, so they share a lot of things around voice of the customer, voice of the process, and a lot of tools around process mapping, cause and effect diagrams, but they come at it a little bit differently and a little bit more analytics and statistics in the Six Sigma side. So sometimes people will wonder, well, where are they in that journey? Because often there's a lot of things that we can just figure out by looking at sort of a lean approach. And then from there, how do we want to build it over time as we look at our organization? And the third thing, which we won't really talk about too much today, but just what you need to think about that also is, well, how are we going to sustain this? How are we going to embed this culture in our organization? So you might want to think about what's our continuous improvement model. You know, do we have a centralized core, or is it purely decentralized, or do we have some sort of hybrid across the organization? How do we make sure that people in the organization feel supported and to help themselves, help the organization be better on a day-to-day basis and as you move forward? So we'll kind of come at it a little bit that way, and we'll talk about how it looks. So it's interesting because, you know, with today's reality is that the organization has many moving parts. So as you look at the screen, you might sort of think, yeah, that looks like our business. And you sort of wonder why we get caught often in, you know, the fire of the day, or, you know, changing priorities, what's happening, what's going on in the business, and are we all in sync and in line? Do we know kind of what our strategy is and what we're trying to accomplish? So just that mayhem, it's an organized flow, but sometimes it can be, you know, daunting to try to figure out where we all fit into it. You know, which can lead to, you know, organizational strategy. You know, as a business, whether you're, you know, in government, in private sector, not-for-profit, wherever you fit in, you need to be thinking about, well, where are we today as an organization? Because we are where we are. Where do we want to be in the future? And how are we going to get there? And really, it's that strategy that drives a lot of continuous improvement and a lot of use of projects. So if we look at this, this is a tool for ocean cannery planning, the X matrix, and it looks a little bit daunting, but it's actually a fairly simplified tool insofar as, you know, as a leadership organization, when you say, well, what are our 3 to 5 year breakthrough strategies? What are we trying to look like? What's that vision of where we want to be in 3 to 5 years? And so that kind of lets us know, well, what do we want to do? And then from that, we can look at, well, how far do we want to get? So what are our annual objectives? So within that vision of where we're trying to get to, how far do we want to get this year? So what are the annual objectives that we have? So how far along that journey, and then we want to be able to measure it. So if we know how far we want to get, the next piece talks about, well, what initiatives and projects do we need to do to get us there? Right? So what are the things we need to do to achieve our annual objectives on our path towards our 3 to 5 year strategy? And then, you know, the next piece is, well, what are the targets and metrics? So how do we measure and track to know that we're actually achieving what we want to do? So this is a strategy that you'll often see some sort of variation of the theme, hopefully deployed in an organization as they sort of are always very thoughtfully moving forward in the direction of what they're trying to accomplish. If you don't have one, if you're just kind of working on the day-to-day, or if, you know, senior leadership are involved in putting out the fire, so they don't have time to be thinking strategically, then we just day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year, we just are where we are. And at some point, you want to sort of understand where we are, where we're trying to get to, and then strategically, what are we going to do and how are we going to get there? Which leads to the, you know, that standard pyramid around, you know, what are our goals, strategic planning, operational planning, project planning, and how they cascade through. So this slide happens to give an example of, we want to increase our customer base. We might be looking at that strategically through our reputation and how we can use that to attract new customers. Operationally, we need to improve our average time to resolution. So we'll have a project that's looking at reducing resolution time for particular types of problems. So things align throughout, and we understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we're trying to accomplish, and that how that feeds into our greater goals, and which again leads back to culture. And we'll talk about culture from a continuous improvement perspective, but also just our culture of everybody understanding how what they do feeds into what the organization is trying to accomplish. Often when what happens is people well, I know what I do, but I don't see how that connects. And so we want to make sure that that connection is in place. Around our initiatives, we want to make sure that they're linked. So we call it President's Goals here, but it could be whatever sort of top tier of your organization looks like, whatever they call it. But we want to make sure that what we're doing is aligning up and it's moving us in the same direction that we're trying to strategically get. So you can have, a very small thing, but it's helping, on that cascade of helping each level achieve their results and their objectives around what we're trying to accomplish. And why do we want to do that? Because, if we have unaligned projects, it might have a local effect, but it might not be aligned to what the organization's trying to do. And if we're not aligned, then, that gives us a whole lot of challenges around, do we have enough time to work on this? How does this fit into our strategy? Are people wanting to work on the project? Because people are looking at, well, how does this tie into what we're trying to achieve? How does this fit into my performance management? How does this fit into whether it's a personal kind of where am I going to get to in the organization or greater, where's the organization going to get through this? So it's important that we think about those things and how they tie in. Now, one thing, typically what we'll do this year, we did it last year, is that if you're hearing me speak quite a bit, I'm going to go through a number of thoughts, topics, slides, and then I'm going to pause. And when I pause, I'm just going to give an opportunity for people to ask any questions that they have. And what you do not need to do is go off mute and say, no, I don't have any questions, and go back on mute. What I'll do is I'll take no response if everybody's okay. So we'll just do a pause, and then if there's no questions, then I'll start back up again. We end each session with a question period, so that if you don't speak now, forever hold your peace. You can always speak later. Or often what people do is they tend to reach out afterwards if they have a certain comment or they want to go deeper into a particular topic that we cover in the webinar. So if you have anything of interest that you'd like to have further conversations about, then you can reach out to Liz or myself, the organization, and we can follow up on a personal level to discuss things. So that's sort of the trifecta as we go through it. So I'm going to use that introduction to do a pause right now in case anyone has any questions. Okay, perfect. So we're talking about alignment of those projects. So to be aligned, we have to know actually what that alignment is. We have to know what those strategies are. And so it really begins at the top of the organization, hidden strategy, and then how does that cascade down through the organization? And how does that then open up into what projects, initiatives, change that the organization wants to make as they go back up through the chain? And depending on what your role is and what you do, you can be, and we really encourage continuous improvement at a local level, and then have that move back up, and also have encourage that there's good listening posts and ways for people who are in the trenches or in the front line doing the work, have a good, easy way to communicate up what their challenges are, so that management's role is always, how do I make your job better? So how do I get rid of the things that get in the way of doing the work? And one of the ways of doing that often are through huddles. So people will have huddles, and that's their sort of communication flow in about what's going on. It allows for quick and immediate communication flow, rather than things building up and then, looking at it because it's become a big problem. Let's deal with things faster when they're smaller problems. So getting back to projects, why do we want to have them aligned? Right? As an organization, we have goals that are ambitious. We're all busy. Often when I speak to people, I don't hear many people say, it's really got nothing to do. Often it's the opposite, and again, part of the continuous improvement vision is around, we're busy, but what are we busy doing? And then strategically, how do we make sure that we keep getting rid of the things to repeat, that are getting in the way of doing the work, so we can spend our time doing the work that we need to do. So what are the challenges? What makes it hard to get the job done? So we don't have resources, so we don't want to waste our time. We want to make sure that we're working on the right things. Aligned projects are more likely to get resources. People are going to want to work on them. Aligned projects more likely to get management support because they can see how that is helping them achieve their objectives. And that, and that goes all the way back up the chain. And aligned projects are more likely to have motivated teams. So people are going to want to work on things that they can see how that ties into the greater good of what the organization is trying to do. And again, if we think about that, that's important because, again, everyone's busy. So if we're going to ask somebody to work on a project or be involved in something, then the better that they can see how it fits, the better that works for them. So again, this slide talks about they can see how the objectives and strategy fit together, understand how the project helps them get there, realize the organization's project objectives are in sync with their own objectives. So as far as how that fits what they want to do, and we want to align this and talk about organizational, but that comes down and trickles down to what's in it for me, the WIFM. So how is this going to help me in what I'm doing with the organization or what I'm doing in general with my career? So better understanding of their roles in the project. Good methodology helps us understand what everybody's trying to do. So if I'm on a project, why am I on it? What are my expectations? How much time am I supposed to be putting into it? What are my objectives? What am I supposed to achieve? Really, so it helps kind of really bring all those things together and understand how the team works together. This is an interesting slide. So a Lean Six Sigma project definition, strategically aligned project which follows a Lean Six Sigma structured methodology, whether we're using Lean, Six Sigma, or both, to help the company reach its goals. But really what's really important here is the bottom part around the goal is not to do Lean Six Sigma projects. Lean Six Sigma is the way to reach your goals. So the objective isn't, I did 4 projects. The objective is, what are we trying to do? And we use those projects to help us get there. And it's a subtle but important differentiator. And again, when we spoke at the beginning, when I talked about when people say, well, what training do we need? What are you trying to achieve? What are the objectives of the organization? And so you want to use Lean Six Sigma methodology as a way of helping you achieve it. It's not an end to itself. It's what gets you there. And there's lots of different ways you can look at it. They all start with voice of the customer, and that customer can be, there's lots of customers. It can be internal or external, but we need to really understand the voice of the customer. What do they want? Because that leads into organizational strategy, which we talked about at the very beginning. What are we trying to achieve? Where are we trying to move to? You've got the voice of the process, so that compares, what's the customer looking for versus how well are we delivering that? The reality is our process is our process, and it's doing whatever it's doing, and look for capability of the process. Is it able to meet the needs of the customer or not? Tying into that, the voice of the front line, where we have our ability to know what's on the ground, what's happening. So the leadership can talk strategically, and the front line and further down can talk tactically about what the issues are. And then there's lots of different ways that we can run our projects and different steps and tools and how we approach it, which the rest of the slide takes us through, leading us to, well, what are we going to do about it? Lots of different things. It could be a just get it done project. It can be taking us through kind of value stream mapping, quick Kaizen, very sort of focused event, localized events. It can take us through a more structured DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. It could be through workplace organization, 5S, 6S events, etc. So it's not one hammer. And so there's lots of different, depending on our organization and the kinds of things that we want to do, can vary the kinds of training that we want to give our staff. They all come back to making sure that we verify that we're actually making the changes and getting the results that we wanted. And when we do, how do we control and make that the new way how we do things. So how do we make that the new habit? How do we make that the new current state? And then we can look at in that position and go, okay, so now what do we want to do, right? So what's the new target state? How do we keep slowly moving towards that vision of what we're trying to accomplish, whether it's through huge strategic initiatives or through very localized small initiatives where we're working towards that common goal. Project sponsor, and I just want to talk a little bit about this again in a few slides, again, that speak about what's the role of the sponsor, helps provide that clear direction to the project leader and team, ensure direction has a SMART goal. How does it align? Again, that whole important that we align what we're doing up and down the organization. Because what you don't want to do is kind of be off all of a sudden on an island, off on your own, working on something and realize that you're sort of drifting away from the continent, which is the actual organization itself, because that's setting yourself up for challenges and the organization for challenges. So really understanding the role of the sponsor, removing roadblocks, helping sort of align that executive communication and working together. So who's that person? Are they aligned? Do they have a good understanding of Lean Six Sigma? We'll talk about that when we talk about different training levels. And it's important that they're an active role. They're not just there to say, yeah, okay, I check a couple of boxes just to get updates. We want them to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and they're not in the day-to-day, but they have an engagement within what's happening within the organization and what the changes you're trying to make are. Members themselves, again, you want to think about, what do they need to do? Make sure that if you're asking someone to work on a project, they know what their expectations are, why they're on the team, what expertise they bring to it, what's expected of them, how much time is expected, a timeline of when that's expected, because that opens and gives them an opportunity to be successful. So that whole kind of being very transparent and visible and working openly is very important. Again, thinking about who those people are, what they know, characteristics of the various people, so that you get a good mixture on your team. You want to have people that can sort of think outside the box and come up with new ideas, but enough people that understand sort of the history of the business, so that you get that good, kind of like the spice that you're putting together on your project, the different sort of pieces that come together. So when we think about sort of the belt levels, there's, often we talk about white belt, yellow belt, black belt, green belt, which actually isn't on there, it should sit on here also. But there's an important one that often gets missed, or the first two often sort of get left out, and that's the leadership sponsor champion belt or training, and often white belt training kind of doesn't get looked at. People look more tactically at yellow belt training, green belt training, black belt training. But on that leadership sponsor champion, again, it has lots of different names and sort of variants, but really you want to make sure that each level of the organization has the knowledge and training that they need. Again, it's not a one size fits all, because people have different roles, different needs, different expectations. And what you want to do is make sure that depending on where they are in the organization, they're getting the right thing. Because if you send, someone to the wrong kind of training, they're either, not getting what they need, or they're getting more than they need. And it, again, isn't necessarily the right fit. So that leadership or champion, they really need to, you want them to know the methodologies that you're using, some of the ideas around tools and what are the outcomes that are expected, and how they can actually drive that. So they're able to inspect what they expect. So if they're the champion of that project, the more they know about the sort of define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and the various toll gates, then as the project team gets through and they define the project and saying, here's what we learned at the define stage, so here's what we want to do at the measure stage, that champion or sponsor should be able to kind of prompt and ask questions so that they can probe and understand, have they thought about everything? Because they're they're coming at it from a slightly different perspective because, you know, they're in a different role in the organization. So they can challenge and enhance the project at each stage as they go through if they have an understanding of what that role is and how it works. So they understand their role in the project and also in continuous improvement, which makes sense if we think back to the beginning. It enhances their ability to contribute to the strategic plan. So that strategic planning exercise, as they understand what that looks like, they can become a stronger, you know, player in that by having an understanding of the methodology and approach. You know, and I have a sort of training, typically it's half to 1 day. They're often sort of short blitzes of specific information that we need them to know and keep them on track. Role of the white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt. Again, depending on where they are in the organization, they're there to support various types of projects and assist champions, work part-time on projects, data collection, change implementation, et cetera, depending on what they're doing and what the needs are. So we think about them sort of from my perspective. I think that every person, actually everybody, period, should have awareness training. I think that everybody in an organization should have it because it's that basic sort of fundamental cultural building block around how you look at things. So, you know, and how you approach things and having the ability to communicate, articulate the challenges in your role to an organization that's hopefully looking for that information to try to make the business better. So typically what's covered is an overview of the methodologies, overview of the tools, overview of the language. And what you end up with is everyone's feeling that they're inside the bubble. They understand when they hear terminology what it means, rather than if they haven't been to any training and they're hearing people talk about, oh, SIPOC this and Kaizen that, and they're going, I don't know anything about that. They're feeling outside. They're feeling away from it all. And you want everyone in the organization to feel that they're part of it, that they're inside that bubble, able to see and capture what's getting in the way of doing the work, right? They're able to start to look through those 8 lenses of waste and see things that make it difficult to get the work done. And then typical training might be 2 to 4 hours. They participate in projects. And again, they become they're a very powerful voice around what's getting in the way, what are the pain points. And then ideally things, whether it's through huddles or through listening posts, whatever an organization uses, a way of how do we get that pain up into the organization so we can get rid of it and make things better. So really that white belt awareness, I find organizations that look and try to get everybody involved works really well. Now, some organizations work on a just-in-time where they'll bring their project teams together and they'll give them that sort of awareness training. We're working on this project, so we're going to give you an immediate level of training, which is a good thing. But I find if you can get that out across the organization, then from a cultural sort of shift perspective, you're in a stronger position. Yellow belt training, there's a couple different ways that I see this used. Really, you're learning whether it's Lean or Six Sigma. And again, when you see me talk about training being in variation of time, it's because is it Lean, is it Six Sigma, is it Lean Six Sigma training? But often a yellow belt training will allow somebody to work on local, simple initiatives within their area so they can start to drive change. They may support a green belt or a black belt on larger initiatives. They can lead Kaizen events, 5S, 6S events. How I've also seen it used is kind of from that layering perspective of what kind of training do we give different people. I've also seen it where they use yellow belt to, as kind of leadership training for directors and managers. And really out of that, what they want them to do is, how do I start managing the business with data? How do I start to understand what my metrics are, what the voice of the customer is? And by setting up those metrics, then that allows them to sort of see and quantify the pain points. And those quantified pain points can then nicely transition into projects. Versus if if we don't have any metrics and don't know, we just know it has to be better, then the first thing the project needs to do is go and collect all that data and really understand the current state. So by setting yourself up organizationally and strategically around what the metrics are, it speeds up and allows us to have continuous improvement projects happen at a faster rate, or we can spend less time on them to get the desired results. So again, I've seen a number of different ways that people have approached it. Some will use, well, let's get people at least knowledgeable driving projects, and then those that, subset of those will then go on to green. So they'll use it as a cascade up, which also works. But a couple of different ways that can be approached, and anyone has any questions or is interested in how that may apply to their organization or themselves, please reach out to it after. So again, Greenbelt training, you're now being, partially trained in Lean or Six Sigma. You've got a good basis around the tools and also some of the project management methodology, so that you can kind of lead localized events and mid-level projects. So, more important, maybe not driving a strategic across the whole organization, but you've moved up that knowledge stream and experience and how much time you're spending on it. Training itself is typically 5 to 8 days, again, depending on whether it's Lean Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. No expectation. Why would you want to take this? There's some active on project work, so you're working on projects. You have a main job, but you're also working on projects. You're also identifying pain points. So like the white belts and anyone else, you're also, identifying the things that are getting wrong. And as your training will help you, you have an easier way for you to see those things, articulate them, quantify them, and which can then lead into potential improvement projects. Black belt, often someone who wants to get a black belt, it's because that's what they want to do. They've kind of said, you know what, I'd really like to do this all the time. I'd like to potentially be working in a continuous improvement team. And, I have my knowledge of working within the business, but I'd like to actually be helping the business strategically achieve what they're trying to do. And so they want to sort of transition into that's their role. They're often leading large projects across departmental, across the organization. They may be supporting or mentoring other belts across the organization. They may have sub-projects within their larger projects, so that here's my big initiative, and within that initiative, there's lots of smaller things that we need to get done, and they become, localized events, and you'll have green belts or yellow belts that are actually driving those changes, and then you're their support mechanism, and how that all, again, cascades up strategically to what we're trying to do. Training on the Lean end could be 10 days to 20 days for Lean Six Sigma. And again, lots of on-site project work where you're really spending your time and have history and experience around driving improvement. So kind of, as you can see, it works up the stream. A little bit more on black belt, that leader. You're a project leader, you're a change leader, you're a technical problem solver, and you're really kind of bringing all those things together. And so it's an exciting role. Personally, I'm biased, but regardless of what level people work on, I think that the methodology helps people be better at their jobs. And whether it's just helping you in your day-to-day role of what you're trying to do, or whether you're actually running projects, it allows you to start to think a little bit differently. I know it had that impact on me, and I think that wherever you want to sort of have those things fit within your organization, the training really kind of raises the water level and lifts the boat about what you can achieve as an organization. When you're assembling your team, something to think about is, they have to care about what you're doing. They have to be knowledgeable enough to know how to do it, and they have to have the tools and methodology, or the ability within the organization to be able to make the change. And if you don't have that, that's where you start to run into problems. If your team really cares about wanting to be what they're doing and they're knowledgeable in what the problems are, but they actually can't do it, then that leads to a lot of frustration. Or if they can and they care, but they don't know how to do it, then they could start to put all the wrong things in place. So they have to have that knowledge. Or if they can do it and they know how to do it, but they actually are missing the other, then there's a lack of action. So you really want to have that can, care, and know as you're sort of looking at your team. A couple other things to think about around alignment. Your teams, when you bring them together on projects, do you have the right, do they understand the goals? Do they understand their roles? Do they understand the processes that we're looking at? And do they understand how we're all going to work together? So our interpersonal side. So there's some great tools that we use around, we call GRPI, or really understanding how that fits. And so this is an example of a template, but each person can look at that and it really highlights where each person on your team is around whether you're thinking you're working together. So as the project lead, you might think, oh, everybody knows, but do they really? And giving them the opportunity and an easy way to sort of speak up and in an open environment, say, what do we need to work on so that we can be successful? Not what the, so understanding the challenges so we can get better. And sort of tying it back again to yourself, how can the various belt levels enhance my personal development plan? So what's in it for me? And again, whether it's you're using this because you want to, within your current role, be better or stronger or able to contribute more, or whether you're looking at your overall plan of what you want to achieve. So formally, as you could sort of move up the chain, and formally, you're starting to build relationships. You're gaining trust and respect. You're known as someone who's enthusiastic, responsible, available, visible, decisive. Really good way to start to work on these various attributes, your various characteristics that, again, I always think of the mentor for myself that has really helped me. And what were those characteristics that they had that I would kind of like follow them anywhere? And then how do I take those and think about, well, how can I work on strengthening those within myself to make me a better person, to make me a better employee? And kind of where that leads, and sort of our last slide is, whether I'm doing it internally or externally, there's a lot of demand for people to have these skills, because it's recognized that it's one thing to, I'm a good person or I want to work hard, but if having the skills and the ability and the experience of helping to drive a positive change in an organization is a very sought after skill. So this is just sort of a mashup of a bunch of things that happen to be out there right now. People looking for people to help them be a better organization. So in your own kind of world of why would I want to do this? It can really give you mobility and ability to either help your own organization or help a different organization. And I think that it's important as an organization that, again, that sort of thought process from the beginning around where are we, what are we trying to accomplish, how are we going to get there, what skills, knowledge, attributes do we have to have that's going to allow us to get there. And again, whether that's your white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, leadership training, kind of what do we need to put in place and how do we make that puzzle fit together that's going to give us the best picture of our organization. So that's kind of what I wanted to go through today. I'll open it up to any questions that people have. And again, you don't have to say no questions. We'll just pause for a minute, jump in if you like, or if you want to just send chat message, you can do that right now, or if you want to just reach out afterwards, if you have any follow-up or you'd like more information on any of the topics that we covered today. So I'll give a pause for a minute.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Just as everyone is digesting that information, I know there was a lot today, and I appreciate that everybody was able to stay on. I know we did go a bit over time. But once again, this webinar has been recorded and it will be posted on the EZSigma Group YouTube channel. So you're welcome to go and take a look at that anytime you want. Also, if this is something that you are considering, or if you're partway on your own path, Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement, and you would like some additional training, there are a few options. We have some open enrollment certification programs coming up. The next in-class training begins March 10th, and there's registration open for that until the 21st. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we also do some on-site training, e-learning, coaching, and consulting services. So if any of these are of interest to you, definitely feel free to reach out to us anytime. Also, as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we are going to be doing a full series again this year. So some of the topics that we're looking at and that were proposed are here. If there are any that you would like to add to this, definitely, again, feel free to reach out to us anytime. So Jeff is still on the line. He'll be here for a few more minutes in case you do have any questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
We'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll let everybody get back to work, and hopefully everybody enjoyed today. And for those that were attending last year, hope you enjoyed last year's, and I'm really looking forward to this year's session. It's a great opportunity to talk about important things about our work. Well, I think we're good. Liz, thank you very much for organizing this, and thanks again to everybody for attending, and look forward to hearing from you in the future. Again, if you have any questions about any of the topics from today, please reach out, and we'd love to chat. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.